Hi boys and girls, welcome to our very first chapter of Chocolate Touch that we're going to be reading this afternoon. Super excited that you are here to join me and see if I can look really close out in YouTube land. Who do I see out there? Ethan, I see you smiling. Hi Ethan, glad you joined us today. I can't see everyone because kind of foggy, but I think over there might be, yep, there's Madison. Hi Madison, she's waving at me. And Peyton, good to see you. Oh, there's so many of you that I'm glad you joined us this afternoon. So, before we begin on our Chocolate Touch, so I hope you have your books ready, I wanted to remind you that in your booklets I gave you too many hands, too many papers, not enough hands. Miss Watson's Class, Our Favorite Poems, and we're going to be reading towards the middle of your booklet is a poem called Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout Would Not Take the Garbage Out, one of my all-time favorites. So see if you can find that in your booklet. Now listen, I'm just going to go, so if at any time you need a little more time to find a page or something like that, hit pause and then push play again when you're ready. So this poem comes out of Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. It's a long one. So, Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. So here we go. Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd scour the pots and scrape the pans, candy the yams and spice the hams, and though her daddy would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. And so it piled up to the ceilings, coffee grounds, potato peelings, brown bananas, rotten peas, chunks of sour cottage cheese. It filled the can, it covered the floor, it cracked the window and blocked the door with bacon rinds and chicken bones and drippy ends of ice cream cones. Prune pits, peach pits, orange peel, gloppy glumps of cold oatmeal, pizza crust and withered green, soggy beans and tangerines, crusts of black buttered burnt toast, grisly bits of beefy roast. The garbage rolled on down the hall. It raised the roof. It broke the wall. Greasy napkins, cookie crumbs, globs of gooey bubble gum, cellophane from green bologna, rubbery blubbery macaroni, peanut butter caked and dry, curdled milk and crust of pie, moldy melons, dried up mustard, eggshells mixed with linen custard, cold french fries and rancid meat, yellow lumps of cream of wheat. At last the garbage reached so high it finally touched the sky, and all the neighbors moved away and none of her friends would come to play. And finally Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout said, "Okay, I'll take the garbage out." But then of course it was too late. From New York to the Golden Gate, and therein the garbage she did hate, poor Sarah met an awful fate that right now I cannot relate, because the hour is much too late. But children, remember Sarah Stout, and always take the garbage out. Good lesson to learn, right? I closed the book so hard I scared my dog Finnegan, who's lying next to me. Poor Finnegan. Okay, so before we get to chapter 1 of Chocolate Touch, I want to remind you that you also have this booklet to do as well if you are doing it with us. Chapter 1 today discusses character traits, and we've done this in class before, so if you remember correctly, you're just kind of describing the character. And I don't mean he's wearing a blue shirt. I mean, what kind of person is this character? How do they behave? So characters can be mean, they can be kind, they can be brave, they can be strong, they can be adventurous, they can be boring. There's many, many different things that they can be.
Don't forget bold.
And bold. They can be bold. Luke is my cameraman. He reminds me of that. So today you're going to identify 3 traits that would describe John. John is the main character in the story, if you remember from our intro. So you're going to use this organizer right here. So just think about his behavior and what he is saying in the story. So you're going to have 3 different traits that you'll write here. And then you have to give reasons from the book for your choices. For example, you can't say brat because he's mean. What in the story told you he was being a brat? He did something, what is it? And not that John is going to be a brat. That's just an example. So remember, your examples have to come from the story. That's good reading. That's good student behavior where you're proving from the book. So that's what you'll do today. So as I read today and you read along, think about John and what kind of character he is. Okay, so the chocolate touch. I'm so excited to see you today. Hope your summer is going well. Has the little, it says tonic with a chocolate bar next to it. Chapter 1. Most of the time, John Midas was a very nice boy. Every now and then, of course, he broke a rule, such as the rule against pretending to be a tiger when his sister Mary was supposed to be getting to sleep. Generally speaking, however, he behaved very well. He should have behaved better. He lived in a comfortable house surrounded by a green lawn and wide-spreading shade trees that were suitable for climbing. His mother was gentle as well as practical. His father, when he didn't have to hurry to town, spent hours telling John interesting things about baseball, beetles, bird nests, boats, brigands, and butterflies. John went to school and liked it. His teacher, Miss Plimsoll, was fairly easy to get along with as long as he did careful work. He had received a new shiny golden trumpet and music lessons as a going-to-school present. Mrs. Quaver, the music teacher, had soon agreed to let him play small parts, a few notes at a time with the school orchestra. So a school orchestra is like a school band. Page 13. Finally, there was Susan Buttercup, who was in his class. Susan had soft yellow curls, round pink cheeks, blue eyes, and one of the best collections of marbles in the neighborhood. John should have been completely well behaved, but he wasn't. He had one bad fault. He was a pig about candy. Boiled candy, cotton candy, licorice of all sorts, old-fashioned toffee, candied orange, lemon slices, Cracker Jack, jelly beans, fudge, black currant lozenges for ticklish throats, nougat, marrons glacés, I'm sure I said that wrong, acid drops, peppermint sticks, lollipops, marshmallows, and above all, chocolates. He devoured them all. While other boys and girls spent their money on model airplanes, magazines, skipping ropes, and pet lizards, John studied candy counters. All his money went on candy, and all his candy went to himself. He never shared it. John Midas was candy mad. At lunch one Saturday, Mrs. Midas noticed a couple of little red spots at the end of John's nose. "Look," she said to Mr. Midas, "John has spots." Mr. Midas leaned forward to look at them. He gravely shook his head and clicked his tongue. John tried to look too, but it's very difficult to see the end of your own nose without a mirror unless you happen to be an elephant with a long nose that you can bend double. When John tried to look at the end of his nose, first with one eye, then with the other, then with both together, all that he could see was a pink blur. Besides, trying to look at something so close made his eyes ache. "I can't see any spots, Mother," John said. "Well, I can," Mr. Midas said. "Just because you don't see a thing doesn't mean it isn't there. Try feeling the end of your nose with your finger." John rubbed his finger over the tip of the nose, and it felt a bit rough. "It may be measles," Mrs. Midas said anxiously. She placed her hands on John's forehead to feel whether he was warmer than usual. "But I don't think he has a temperature," she decided. "I suspect John has been eating too much candy again," Mr. Midas said. "Have you been eating candy this morning, John?" "Some," John admitted. "What?" Mr. Midas asked. "Well," John replied, "well, I had a few cream delights. Susan gave them to me." "Anything else?" Mr. Midas asked. "A little toffee crunch," John said. "And what else?" Mr. Midas asked, beginning to look cross. John's ears grew red. He knew he wasn't supposed to eat candy before meals. "Oh, only "Oh, hardly anything else," he said. "John," Mr. Midas said, and his son recognized the tone. It meant that John had to tell everything. It turned out that John had been around to see most of his friends and had managed to get candy from nearly all of them. The list he recited was a long one. "No wonder you have spots," Mr. Midas commented at last. "I think we better take John to see Dr. Cranium," he said to Mr. Midas. Said to Mrs. Midas. I'm sorry. So if you're following along, I'm on page 16 towards the bottom. We're about to see Dr. Cranium. Dr. Cranium was a tall, thin man with a bald head and a gray mustache. He looked through his glasses at John and said, "He eats lots of candy," Mr. Midas said. "He hasn't been eating his meals properly," Mrs. Midas said. "That's just what I thought," Dr. Cranium said. "I can tell by looking at him that he eats too much candy." The doctor shone an electric light into John's right ear. Then it shone into John's left ear. Then he shone it into John's nose. He told John to open wide and say, "Ah." Then he shone the light into John's mouth. Too much candy. Gracious me, it seems he is full of candy." He told John to sit down and relax. Then he picked up a small rubber-headed hammer and gave John a light tap on his right knee, just below the joint. John's foot gave a weak kick. John giggled. "It's nothing to laugh about," Mr. Midas said. "No, John," the doctor reproved him. "A healthy little boy who didn't eat too much candy would kick harder than that." "I'm sorry," John said politely, "but I can kick harder if you want me to." And he gave a sudden high kick, which knocked the hammer out of Dr. Cranium's hand, and it landed on his rubber head and bounced across the room. "John!" exclaimed Mrs. Midas. "I am so sorry, Dr. Cranium. John, tell the doctor you're sorry for kicking his hammer." "I'm sorry for kicking your hammer," John said. "I would recommend less candy," Dr. Cranium told Mr. and Mrs. Midas. "An upset stomach can lead to all sorts of complications." On the way home, Mrs. Midas tried to explain to John what she thought the doctor meant by complications. "You see," she said, "if you put too much of one kind of food in your stomach and not enough of other kinds, it is bad for your whole body, because different parts of your body need different kinds of food. Do you understand?" Top of page 19, if you're following along. "I think so," John said. "You've been eating so much sweet stuff," Mr. Midas added, "that there isn't room for eggs and meat and milk and bread and spinach and apples and fish and bananas and all the other things you're supposed to have to make you grow big and strong." "I like bananas," John said, "especially thin slices covered with chocolate." "They're called banana surprises." Mr. Midas looked at Mrs. Midas, and Mrs. Midas looked at Mr. Midas. They both shrugged their shoulders. Sometimes it was hard to make John understand things. At home, while Mrs. Midas was busy in the kitchen, Mr. Midas continued to reason with John. "You mean you'd rather eat candy than anything else? And chocolate rather than any other kind of candy?" Mr. Midas asked. "Yes," John assured him. "Oh, yes." Top of page 20. "Don't you think there's such a thing as enough?" Mr. Midas persisted. "Don't you think that things are best in their places? I mean, don't you think there's a time for spaghetti, and a time for roast beef, and even a time for pickled herring and garlic toast, as well as time for chocolate? Or would you rather have chocolate all the time?" "Chocolate all the time," John replied emphatically. "Chocolate's best, that's all. Other things are just food, but chocolate's chocolate." "Chocolate! I think I understand," Mr. Midas broke in sharply. "Very well." He took a deep breath and went on. "John," he said, "if you can't understand what sort of diet is really best for you, can't you at least get it into your head that you make your mother very unhappy when you eat so much candy that you can't eat anything else?" The conversation always seemed to get around to the effect of John's candy eating on John's mother. John couldn't see how it could possibly do her any harm if he ate candy. He sat silent for a moment, and then he said, "May I go out and play, please, Daddy?" that's the end of chapter 1. So we're going to be on chapter 2 next time we meet. So again, what kind of person do you think John is? We know he's crazy about chocolate. We know they were trying to reason with him to get him to eat other things, and I don't think that went very well. Do you, Ethan? Ethan says, nah, he doesn't think it went very well either. So, next time we meet, we will be on chapter 2. Hopefully you'll have all of this done. We'll start with another poem as well. I was thinking about, instead of recording one per week and posting it, that maybe I would record a bunch over the past next week or so and get the book done as soon as possible. That way you guys can go at your own pace with the book. And so you might see that coming up. So you don't have to watch it as soon as I post it. You can take your time. Just your goal is to try to get it done before we get back to school in September, which is very far from now, so you don't have to worry too much about it. So I hope everyone's first full week of summer is going well. Mine is, and I can't wait to see you next time for chapter 2 to figure out what's going to happen to poor John Midas. And I think we call him a chocoholic at about now. So I will see you all next time. Goodbye!